listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 116 of the DCAU Review. I am Liam, and with me, as he always is Cal. And Cal, we have come to the end of another month, although sometimes it's difficult to tell because every day, every week, every month just sort of runs together. But we are, in fact, nearing the end of July, believe it or not, and that means we are wrapping up our latest stay in the world of Dakota and then the world of Static Shock, as we are wrapping it up this week with Static in Africa.
Yeah, so a lot of us, it's funny, this episode obviously is from a very, very long time ago, as we'll discuss, but it's nice to think back to when Americans were allowed to travel the world. Vacations were a thing. Summer was a thing. This is, to me and my wife talk about frequently how this is the summer that just doesn't exist. Yep. So, it was nice to live vicariously through Static for this week's episode as he takes a little trip to Africa. Hey, that's the name of the episode. So yeah, it's a fun ride. We get to sort of broaden the horizons a little bit. We kind of get a little bit of talk on sort of real world, real life, present day topics. We get some cool action from some superheroes from another country. We got it all in this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will, of course, get into our four main categories, which, of course, as we haven't mentioned in several episodes, if this happens to be your first episode, first of all, thank you for listening. And yep. Second of all, we have four main categories that we always break it down by, Cal, and then that gives us our final score. Can you tell the listeners at home, if this is their first episode, what our four categories are?
Absolutely. So we break them down, and each category has a score between 0 and 10. I don't think we've had but maybe one episode give us a 0, a 0 in a category. So that's an extreme rarity. 10, of course, being the highest. We have four different categories, as Liam mentioned. We have plot, then we have visuals and animation. So that's going to be based on, obviously, the animation changes from show to show that we cover, but kind of just blending that together, keeping things on model, but also interesting things that they decided to include as visuals in the episode. Then we have music, of course, which is going to be our soundtrack, going to be the score to the episodes. And then, of course, voice acting. These DCAU episodes are well known for their guest actors and a whole cast of voice characters that are just absolutely legendary at this point when it comes to voice acting. So we give each of them a ranking, and then we get a final score of blank out of 40. 40 out of 40, of course, being our perfect episodes, of which there are just a very few. We have several episodes that we like to call our top picks, which you can check out. We have broken those down at DCAUreview.com. You can head over to there. There's actually a top pick section that'll give you only the best of the best, and that's any episode that we have ranked 37 and up. So you can check those out at DCAUreview.com if you're interested. Check out the full archive there.
Very good, Cal. And we will get into ranking this week's episode. But first, as is tradition, I have right here in my hands, I have the official Imdb synopsis for this episode that we get from the Internet Movie Database website.
Perfect.
And this is for the episode Static in Africa, which was written by Dwayne McDuffie, with storyboard supervision by Vic Dahl-Schale, with music by Richard Wolff, and animation by Coco Enterprises. And that synopsis reads as such. The Hawkins family takes a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Africa, where the family take pride in their heritage.
Are you sure that's the official synopsis?
That is the official Imdb synopsis. That synopsis covers about the first 3 minutes of the episode. and does not mention most of what the actual plot of the episode itself is. Like I said, that does cover sort of the beginning of the episode. Static, Virgil, his sister Sharon, and their dad are all on this plane. They go to Africa. We get a little bit of history of the culture there. They are in Ghana, and we hear about the culture, some of their culture there. Virgil is sort of remarking how nice it is to not feel so out of place. He tells his friend Richie that he doesn't feel like a black kid. He just feels like a kid. And as he's sort of enjoying and absorbing the culture, we get what I would say is the other 95% of the plot, which is they meet a doctor on a train who has some sort of research he's working on. He's confronted by a tiger man, for lack of a better term. Is there a better term than tiger man that I can say, Cal?
I think that unless you were going to call him like Mr. Tiger or something like that, I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah, and we can get into some fan theories later about whether or not he's an early splicer or some kind of metahuman. But yes, this strange tiger man and his followers. The tiger's name is Osebo. Attempt to steal the research that this doctor has, and they are confronted by the patron superhero of Africa, that of course being Anansi the spider.
Yeah. So fun fact, Liam, I did some research, and are you aware that Anansi actually has a connection to another member of the DCAU?
I'm not sure. I don't think I did know that.
Well, I did a little bit of research, and as far as main DC universe continuity, as well as the Arrowverse continuity, Anansi is quite possibly responsible for creating the totem that Vixen actually uses. To her powers, of course, she's able to sort of draw upon the powers of different animals, different creatures. And he's actually, at least in the DCU proper, and certainly in the Arrowverse, he's responsible or believed to be responsible for creating that totem. So is it possible that he's also linked to the DCAU Vixen? I don't see why not.
That's awesome. I quite truly did not know that. So that's a fascinating bit of trivia there, and I actually love that.
Well,
yeah, we don't get much in a way of an origin for Vixen, and as far at least in the DCAU version of her.
Sure, yeah, and let me preface that by saying that Anansi in the DC universe is the African god of mischief, versus just being the character that we see sort of in this interpretation of him. So it may not be a 1-to-1. This is that character, but this character, I believe, is based on that character or the folklore of this African folklore hero of this god of mischief, Anansi.
Yes, yeah, that's sort of alluded to a little bit. I think the name of the tiger, Osebo, is also a character from one of the stories about Anansi, which is, yes, this clever trickster god who often took the form of a spider in sort of African folklore. And he's manifested here in a more traditional, as you mentioned, a more traditional superheroic fashion. He does sort of have that I guess sort of a trickster power, as he's able to sort of create these grand illusions, as well as some others. He can kind of just do whatever. It feels like he can kind of just do whatever. And I was trying to kind of figure out throughout the episode if he's just a man who has taken on that name because he has similar powers, or if he is literally meant to secretly be this god, this folklore hero. And obviously there's another episode with him, so that episode may go more into his origins. I think actually our friends over at Tim Talk just recently reviewed that one, so I'll have to listen to their review and catch up with that episode, as I haven't seen it in years. But yeah, so anyway, we have Anansi the spider. the hero of Africa, and he's sort of defending this doctor's research. The tiger gets away with it. We find out that the tiger is seeking out this lost treasure that's underwater, and in order to get to the treasure, well, they got to blow up a dam and potentially flood a large portion of the continent.
They're gonna blow up the ocean.
That's right. Straight out of a Blue Lasers playbook. They are threatening to blow up the ocean. Yes, a very deep cut. But yes, they are there, but thankfully, Static, being the hero that he is, we've talked earlier this month about how Static sort of just has these random extra powers that he's given on any week, or depending on what the story needs. Previously, he has like special internet search powers. And this week he has these tracers, but rather than say how Batman would use a tracer where it just gives off a radio signal and he follows it, somehow Static alone is able to track these tracers. I guess he charges them with electricity, and then the electricity sort of slowly pulsates, and he's able to track the electricity that he infused into this tracer. I don't know that this is scientifically accurate, I guess is what I'm saying, Cal.
Unclear. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like we say every single week. It's just something that sort of is a plot device used to. It's like, oh, we discovered that Static has this new invention, I guess, that Richie created that you just explain away as a way to involve Static. Because that's sort of at the beginning of this episode. You're thinking, it's like, all right, so he's on vacation. First of all, how is he able to get his Static costume through customs, let alone this like transforming metal shield that he rides around on? Like, okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So he gets all that through customs and through security and all that. And I didn't mention, but this episode originally premiered on February the 8th, 2003. So this is certainly after security changed and checkpoints and all of that, because this is clearly after everything that happened in 2001, at least in our world. So you would think it would be hard to get a metal disc through customs and through security, but maybe not. I don't know. It folds up, so maybe that was the explanation. But yeah, it's just another thing that they're like, well, how are we going to get Static to be involved in this, or how are we going to give him an excuse to kind of be involved in this situation? And it's clear that Anansi holds his own. It's not like Static needed to really help him, although he kind of gives him an assist in stopping this runaway train that they're on, which also is sort of an unexplained power of Static. Like, how does the electricity stop the train?
I don't know.
Okay, all right. So
he can create like force fields with it sometimes. He can like carry things with it. I guess, I don't know. He reverses the polarity of the electrons and makes the train lighter. I don't know. Like,
sure. Okay.
It's some sort of pseudoscience, I'm sure.
My point is that there's a lot of Static's powers that's just like, oh, okay, I guess a lightning bolt can create a force field that protects them from a giant rock avalanche, or I guess that electricity can charge this tracer that only he can trace in order for him to have to be involved in this tracking of Osebo. Like, I guess that makes sense. I don't know. It's just one of those things where you're like, okay, I guess.
For sure. But from there, yes, Static and Anansi are able to track down Osebo at the dam. They just sort of fight the bad guys and win, and that's sort of the end. What I will say this, Cal. There's stuff in this episode from a plot standpoint that I like. It's obviously it's a unique setting to have it take place in another country. And in the terrain, and we'll certainly get to that in visuals and animation later. But so there's things I like the setting and the stuff where Virgil is sort of opining about how he doesn't feel so out of place, as we said. He's talking about how he feels more at home because he's around his own people. There's a talk they have at one point about this African philosophy of that, anyone with African ancestry is at home, and they're all one people, all one race, and that seems to really hit home with Virgil, and I think that's really fascinating. And then there's this little conversation they have at the end of the episode where Virgil's talking about how cool it is to have another African or black superhero to look up to, and Anansi sort of tells him, hey, I look up to you too, and people back home in America, they have a black superhero to look up to because you're there. And I really liked that, and I thought it was fascinating, and I kind of wish more of the episode had focused on that side of it. I understand maybe that teeters on you turning it into like a very special episode, a PSA episode, but that to me was the most interesting part of the episode, was sort of the feelings and emotions that Virgil was going through. But that's sort of a very minor, quick moments in this episode, and a lot of it is just Tiger Man steals a briefcase, and now Static and Anansi go off to fight him. Like it's sort of, and then like we said, there's some African history and African culture thrown in as well. But like to me, the most interesting part of this is Virgil sort of learning to seeing a different side of himself, discovering new things about himself, about his culture, and I just wish there was more of that, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. And, obviously we haven't reviewed a lot of Static just yet. And I think looking at this back with 2020 eyes into a 2003 cartoon, it might be easy to kind of pick out things like, man, like there's a lot here that could be touched on that is very topical. That probably should have been topical for a very long time, and maybe it's just has a spotlight shined on it because of everything that's happened this year and over the last few years. So I think that in some way creates the interesting aspect of it, because you think about that and you think about the characters in mainstream cartoons and how much of that was almost Dwayne McDuffie's voice speaking. I mean, that's the whole reason why the Milestone universe was created, and why Static having his own cartoon is so important, is because you look at the characters in the DCAU until we had Justice League, where we had Jon Stewart, who became a focal point of the show at one point, but wasn't necessarily the focal point at the beginning, and wasn't maybe the main character right off the bat, or a main character right off the bat, despite being a part of the team. You didn't have a strong representation of an African-American or an African-American hero. And even today in comic books, obviously, and again, I'm speaking from somebody that's white, so that's
yes.
This is my perspective on things, but you don't have to have eyes to see that. I mean, you only have to have eyes to see that, the majority of superheroes in mainstream are not black.
Yes.
So that topic, him bringing that up as the character, almost being the voice of what young African-American kids may themselves be experiencing or looking up to, or saying, man, it's difficult because I love superheroes, but there are so few superheroes that look like me that are on the screen. And Anansi, who obviously is who Static is looking up to in this, not only calls Static his hero, but points out very obviously, it's like, well, Static, you are an American hero that young black kids can look up to as a hero, to be a role model. So yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think that's obviously, like I said, I think because of how in our face, and how topical that certainly race relations and white privilege and all of that has been in the year 2020. That's I think certainly something that we're hopefully more sensitive to at this point, and that's something that kind of rings a couple bells when you see it and you hear it. But yeah, I don't disagree with you that that would have been a little bit more interesting to kind of pass through, maybe even having Static have a few doubts or have, been struggling with this throughout, because it's kind of just tacked on at the end. I mean, he talks a little bit in the beginning about, like you said, he feels like he can be just a kid in Africa as opposed to being a black kid. So there's a little bit of that touched on, but it's kind of touched on in that brief, and it's kind of briefly, and then kind of passed over, like you said, for guy robs a train or Catman robs a train to till the very end, where they have this kind of heart to heart between Anansi and Static himself. So yeah, I think that would have been more interesting to cover. Obviously, though, it's also a children's cartoon that we have to look at, and it's dealing with probably a little bit less heavier topics. So I don't know. I think it's good. I think that could have been stronger with that, and I think that's more fascinating if they leaned on that a little bit more. My score may have been a little bit higher. With that said, I still gave plot because it's fun. I did enjoy it. I think Anansi's a great character. I think that their interactions together are extremely fun. I think that tapping into this kind of lesser known African folklore legend of a character was interesting, as opposed to just we're gonna pull out another milestone character, or we're gonna go with another random DC universe character. So with that said, I gave plot an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm right in the same ballpark. I went 7 out of 10 because despite sort of the critiques we've laid out here, some things we may have liked to see, I think overall, the as funny as the joke sounds, to say like, oh, it's just two guys chasing a cat man and trying to stop him from blowing up a dam. Like, it's a very simple superhero versus supervillain plot, but it is a lot of fun, and we'll certainly get into that as we move on to our other categories. But yeah, I think despite maybe some things could have made it even better, but it's certainly not a bad story by any stretch. It's still quite a bit of fun. All right, and moving on here, Cal, to the world of music. I do not have a lot of notes about music this week. I do enjoy the music on the train scene, kind of everything from when Osebo shows up and accosts the doctor to Anansi revealing himself. I really like the music there. A lot throughout the episode, I did notice there's a lot of the percussion is seemingly done on sort of more traditional African drums, more acoustic drums. I did appreciate that. I play the drums myself in real life, so I always take note when there's sort of unique percussion in any episode. So I liked that. I liked a lot of the music on the train, and some of the music during the final fight scene as Static and Anansi are taking down Osebo's crew inside the dam, but not as much standout, certainly not as much music that pulls focus, for better or worse, as a lot of our episodes of Static have certainly pulled focus, either for good or for bad, depending on which one of us was scoring the episode. But what did you think of music this week?
Definitely laid off of the distracting music for a lot of it, which I appreciated. There was still heard some lyrics snuck in there at the beginning. I think the opening scene, and I think even when they land in Africa, there's some lyrics thrown into the music. So it's still there. With that said, there was definitely more of a traditional score, especially that I noticed during the scene on the train. There was more traditional score with the fight scene at the end, where they're inside the dam. There's definitely more traditional scoring of this. I did also notice the sort of tribal African style music that they threw in there, which of course, not to say I was expecting it, but you would think that there would be based on where they are in the story. So I didn't think anything stood out as being great. Nothing detracted certainly as much as we've talked about music for this month, and as much as I've poo-pooed it. This episode, there wasn't. I feel like they stayed kind of plateaued, sort of where they were last week. We talked about it. It wasn't as bad as the hard as nails episode, and certainly wasn't as bad as the Shaq episode. So I went with just a standard 5 out of 10 for music for this week.
Yeah, I went a little higher. I went 6 out of 10. Yeah, I do really like the sort of the theme. There's sort of some chanting and like I said, some really unique percussion when Anansi reveals himself. We get some of the static theme that plays, I guess, the season 2 main theme, but it's sort of within the show is his main sort of superheroic theme throughout the entire series. And yeah, I liked that. So yeah, there's nothing as stand out, be it positive or negative, as there has been in the last few weeks that we've been reviewing Static. But yeah, still I still enjoy music quite a bit this week. And moving on from there, we will move on to visuals and animation. And Cal, I'll let you go first. I have some thoughts on visuals and animation. A lot of good stuff, save for one thing. What did you think of visuals and animation this week?
All right, so we're still in season 3, which is certainly leaps and bounds above season 2. I thought that this episode had a tougher hill to climb because, unlike the last 2 episodes, a lot of daylight in this episode. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about that before, how especially in some of the newer digital animation shows, this show, I think specifically because it is far less detailed and far less shadow work seems to be done, and it's sort of kind of on the outskirts of the traditional DCAU style as opposed to being smack dab in the middle like the rest of the shows are. Mm-hmm. So all of that, I feel like, in a way, works against this episode being in the daylight. We've talked about how that sometimes disguises things, make it look a little bit less like the 90s Spider-Man cartoon and more like, Batman the Animated Series instead. There's a reason why they sort of did those episodes on dark paper and did that, because it disguises a lot of the imperfections or the things that stand out on cheaply made cartoons. So with that said, I think that there are some things that are interesting looking. Obviously, we mentioned this is the series debut of Anansi. So he is a gentleman that's sort of resembles, I guess his costume sort of resembles the Shadow a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little Shadow. Obviously, the Shadow wears his handkerchief on his face, like every good American should. But sorry, neither here nor there. Anyway, and Anansi's wearing his over his eyes, like a sort of like a Zorro type costume too. You got some Zorro in there as well. So definitely interesting looking. I like the spider on his costume. Also sort of somewhat resembles the spider on the back of the Spider-Man costume, the traditional Spider-Man costume. Obviously we get a verbal nod to that too, which we may talk about at some point. But so yeah, I like that. I thought it was interesting that Static ditched his jacket halfway through the episode.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, somehow Static got all of his gear and equipment in through customs and into Africa. And yeah, the first scene we see him when he's just flying out at night, sort of enjoying himself, sort of just flying out. Some really actually really nice sort of panning shots of him flying over like rivers, and you see a lot of the wildlife there looking up as he flies through. And yeah, he's got his jacket on like normal, but then yeah, later when he and Anansi are teaming up to track down Osebo, suddenly Static's gone jacketless.
He's got to show off the arm work that he's been doing.
Yeah, no, I don't dislike the look, but it does just look a little bizarre because there's not really a reason given within the context. It's not like his jacket gets torn in an earlier scene or something.
Maybe it's because it's super warm.
Yeah, maybe, but I don't know. That makes as much sense as anything. Like I said, it doesn't bother me. I don't think it looks bad, but it is. It definitely pulled focus for a moment or two. But yeah, I will say for the most part, I really really enjoyed this episode from a visual standpoint. I also enjoyed the design of Anansi. I like the way the way he he doesn't, unlike Spider-Man, who sort of crawls on walls, he can just walk on them and run on them and stand on them. There's a great shot of Static flying on his little disc that he surfs around on, and Anansi is just standing on the bottom of it, flying around. And later they grab one of the henchmen and sort of flip around and throw the guy into the water. They do some really creative stuff with Anansi's powers, as well as his sort of powers of illusion that he shows off. They do some really creative stuff with that. Also, I haven't talked about this in a while, Cal, but there is some gosh darn great #Kate movement in this episode by Anansi. There's a great shot where Static sort of uses his powers to blind the villains, and then it cuts to sort of this POV shot of Anansi standing in front of one of the bad guys, and he throws a punch into the camera, and then as you see the unconscious guard on the floor, Static and Anansi are standing there. Anansi's just in that classic hero pose, hand on hips, and that cape is just flowing, and it looks great. Like, seriously, I was struck by, they did a great job. I think Coco was the animator on this episode, and I was impressed. First of all, I don't get to talk about #Kate movement very much when we do Static, so I had to bring it up on our rare occasions that I get to bring it up, but I love that. I will say, my one thumbs down for this episode, I'm not a big fan of Osebo's look.
All right, let's hear it. Why not?
Like, because I think if you say that on paper, it's a tiger, it's half man, half tiger, and he's got a metal hand. You're like, your inner child is like, that sounds like the coolest looking character ever. But he looks more like, I don't know, like a Thundercats villain or something to me than more like that than like a DCAU villain. He has this, he has like I should say he's a leopard. We've been calling him a Tiger Man the whole time, but he is specifically referred to as a leopard by Anansi at one point. But yeah, so he has like a striped tiger face. That's cool. But then he just has like this orange. I don't even know. Is it a shirt? Is it his skin? Hard to tell. And then he has like yellow pants, and then yes, this one silver claw hand, which is cool. But I don't know, the overall presentation of Osebo as like this imposing villain that's gonna menace the people of Africa. I just didn't buy it. Like he looks like a Power Rangers villain or a Thundercats villain or something to me. He-Man, maybe.
Yeah, I kept looking at him and thinking that they drew similarities from him to Bronze Tiger. It's like, were they not able to use like Bronze Tiger and they wanted to make the villain similar? Because as far as I understand, this is an original villain. He also is a part of African folklore. So I don't know.
There's specifically a story, I believe, involving Anansi the spider trickster god and this leopard called Osebo. But so I guess it's part that, but yeah, he's not really, as far as I know, other than that, based on any sort of existing DC characters.
Right. So I don't know. I don't know if there's visuals that they went off of or what have you, but yeah, it was an odd choice. He has the actual tail of a leopard also, so it's not just like, I don't know. I guess we can speculate. Is this a Dr. Milo like knockoff creation? Somebody in Africa got wind of Dr. Milo's experiments and decided to try their own, or he was shipping splicer material over to Africa also in an attempt to make this the metahuman half animal half man thing go international, or is this just like some sort of weird magic leopard that's turned into an anthropomorphic man? Or
yeah, more questions than answers, I think, when it comes to Osebo, at least in this first episode. Like we said, there is a follow-up episode where Anansi and Osebo return, so perhaps it's better explained there. But as far as this episode in a vacuum, yeah, he's just, like I said, I was just very unimpressed with the look of this guy, and I just thought he everything else in the episode looks really good and looks pretty cool, and he does not look cool to me. So Maybe they could have tacked this on into JLU at some point. Like, hey, Anansi could have joined the Justice League at some point. I mean, there's a lot of people in that crowd in Initiation. We don't know that he wasn't there.
That's true. It's a good point. I would have liked to have seen him included at some point, or maybe the Justice League takes a trip over to Africa, or hey, maybe in like the Kronos episode they run into him somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know. That would have been.
Isn't Gorilla City in Africa?
Oh baby, I believe it is.
That's a crossover. And Bird City, I think, is also in Africa.
No, I believe we established Bird City is in South America, if you recall.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
keep your highly intelligent, evolved animal cities separate, please.
That's right. It was wrong of me to generalize, but you're of course right. Bird City is a completely different thing. But yes, anyway,
if you don't know what Bird City is, please check out our latest bonus episode of the DCAU review, where you'll hear all of our speculation as to the origins of Mr. Wing, who just recently made his DCAU and DC Comics debut in the recent digital first Batman the Adventures Continue comic. But continuing on with this episode.
That's right. So yeah, other than Osebo's sort of disappointing look, I really loved the visuals all throughout this episode. Like I said, especially some of the way Anansi's powers were visualized. So I actually gave this a very strong score of 9 out of 10.
I'm right in the same neighborhood. I went 8 out of 10. I think it's good. I think that the daylight stuff sort of brought my score down just a little bit. I think even the final battle, I appreciated that it was inside the dam as opposed to being outside. But I felt like a nighttime battle would have done that a little bit better. But who am I to decide what a 2003 cartoon? Actually, that's what we do here.
That's literally what we're here for.
Literally what we're here for. That's a good point.
Yeah. So yeah, overall, I think it's a very strong visual episode either way, and that will bring us, Cal, to our final category, and that is, of course, voice acting. And not a huge guest cast, but we do have some notable guests. It's funny, Cal, both in the episode and in our review here, Spider-Man's been name-checked a few times. And that's interesting to me because playing Dr. Inoki, this doctor who's sort of doing research on this ancient lost city where this treasure is that Osebo is trying to locate is found, is voiced by one Roscoe Lee Brown, who in fact voiced the Kingpin on the 1990s animated Spider-Man series.
Is this seat taken? No. Aquaba. Medasi. I am Dr. Anoki, professor of archaeology at the University of Ghana. I'm Robert Hawkins, and these are my children, Sharon and Virgil. We're tourists. From America, yes? Perhaps we are distant cousins. One never knows. That's true, kids. About 16% of all American slaves came from Ghana.
Really? We gotta ditch Pop's books.
I want to show them where the Ashanti kings used to live.
Then you must go to the Premba Jubilee Museum. They have...
Yeah, I thought that's an interesting connection there to the Spider-Man animated universe. I guess that's a thing. Well, actually, that whole Marvel animated universe is its own universe. That's its own show, or its own Elseworlds tale for another time. But yeah, interesting that he gets to. I mean, it's just one of those things where it may be a coincidence because he's clearly a very good voice actor, or it's something that they were like, hey, let's go do this because it would be funny on top of that. I don't know. I think that Andrea Romano just is able to pull out great voice actors and actresses, and this guy clearly, because he had a pretty big role, pun intended, on that show, just seemed to fit seamlessly into another role that they needed.
Yeah, there you go. And speaking of everyone's favorite talking tiger / leopard, Osebo is voiced this week by Michael Jai White, and it's funny, Cal, that you mentioned Bronze Tiger, because folks may recognize Mr. White from his performances as Bronze Tiger on the Arrow series.
Yeah, I would say he also did, from my recollection, he did Doomsday's voice also in Justice League. Is that right?
Absolutely. He's also in The Dark Knight, so a lot of different DC acting credits to his name. Voiced the Jon Stewart Green Lantern in the Justice League Heroes video game. And of course, I can't not mention that he was Spawn in the wonderful, in quotes, live-action Spawn movie from 1997. The best year for superhero movies, as we all remember.
Oh, man. Todd McFarlane's still working on the reboot for that movie 23 years later, but yep.
I'm sure Michael Jai White's performance was not the problem with that movie. I'll just say that. Sure. I like him as Osebo. Again, he's kind of just a generic, angry villain here. Like you said, he's motivated by greed, but I do think he does a solid job here as the villain of our piece here.
The spider weaves his web, and the cat is caught.
But a cat has many lives, Anansi. I can still detonate the explosives with this. So unless you watch your flying friend crushed, you will reveal yourself.
You press the button, and we all go.
Do not tempt me.
Yeah, his voice, despite maybe us not loving the actual character design, I think his voice work is fine here.
And then, before we get to our main guest actor of the week, we'll go through our main cast here. We do briefly have Jason Marsden as Richie. We have Michelle Morgan as Sharon. And, of course, we have Kevin Michael Richardson as Virgil's dad. And, of course, Phil LaMarr himself playing Static. But in this episode, and I do think Phil LaMarr does quite a good job in this episode, but he is getting to play off of someone he was probably familiar with by this point, and that is, of course, his Justice League co-star, Carl Lumbly, the Martian Manhunter himself, playing Anansi the Spider here.
I suggest we stand on tradition, Osebo. You know well the ancient story. The spider always captures the leopard.
Hello.
What do you say, friend leopard? Shall we dance?
Who is that?
I am Anansi the Spider, ever at your service.
He is the most famous crime fighter in all of West Africa.
I was too modest to say.
What did you think of Mr. Lumbly's work in it? Is it tough to have a recognizable voice playing a completely unique character?
I think we discussed this going back to the Stalker episode of Batman Beyond, which you can hear in the archives at DCAUreview.com or wherever you stream your podcasts. But yeah, we talked about that at the time and how he's such a unique voice. We've talked about that with the Joker and Mark Hamill's first appearance in Heart of Ice and playing another character. That comes up very, very often, it seems, again, because you have Andrea Romano who does the voice casting for these cartoons, and she uses a lot of the same people. So yeah, there are times where it's like, ooh, man, that's kind of weird, and not hear somebody else when you're watching a different character. I think with this, though, with the accent that he uses, he uses a pretty standard African Ghanese. I guess Ghanese is the way that you would classify it, right? Someone from Ghana is Ghanese. So he uses an African accent, and it disguised his voice enough where there were times where it stood out. You're like, oh, that's Carl Lumbly, but at other times, I kind of got lost in the voice itself and didn't notice it as much. So I think his performance, because of that, I think that speaks to his ability to play multiple characters, to be able to interpret this character differently than the way he played Martian Manhunter, different than he played the Stalker. It's a testament to Mr. Lumley's ability to as a voice actor. He's really, really good.
Absolutely. And I do think it helps that Anansi is so different, not only in the accent he chose, but also in sort of the way he delivers the lines. Anansi, again, based on this sort of trickster god of folklore, he's very quippy, he's very light, and he makes a lot of jokes. He's very he's very, very humorous character, and I think that really helps it stand out. So yes, even though it is a recognizable voice, you can tell who it is, especially if you're like us and have been watching these cartoons for years and years. It is noticeable, but I think because it's so different than the Martian Manhunter voice or even the Stalker voice, I think it kind of stands out on its own. And like I said, I really enjoyed his back and forth with Phil LaMarr as Static in this episode, and especially the scene at the end that we talked about as Static is sort of lamenting about not having a black superhero to look up to back home. And
I will miss you, my friend. And your good humor.
I'll miss you too, Anansi. I never knew how important it would be to meet a role model like you.
Role model?
Yeah, a black superhero. I don't know, it validates me somehow.
Heroes come in every color, my friend.
I know. It's just that sometimes I wish there was a black superhero back home for folks to look up to.
Oh, but there is. And he is my hero too.
And Anansi sort of giving him the life lesson, one, that yes, heroes come in many colors, but also that there absolutely is a black superhero and in America for everyone to look up to, as we talked about, and that being Static himself. So I thought they were especially great together as a duo here.
Yeah, I think that their chemistry is obvious. It's obvious they had been working on Justice League before this together, so it's clear that they have plenty of chemistry. It certainly translates over to playing two different characters here on this show, and speaks to the professionalism of both of them and the ability to just get great performances out of each other. I think they do a great job. I think that overall voice acting is incredibly strong in this episode by a great cast, great choices by Andrea Romano to cast the people in this, and that's why I ended up giving voice acting a perfect 10 out of 10.
Nice. Yeah, and I actually gave it the exact same score there. I also gave it a 10 out of 10.
Nice.
Yeah, that's I think that's the highest a voice acting score we've given for Static so far, and well deserved in this episode. Like I said, especially on the strength of Carl Lumbly and Phil LaMarr there. But yeah, that'll begin to bring us to our final scores here, Cal, and tallying everything up. I have a final score of 32 out of 40.
Nice. I am right in the same neighborhood, just a tick lower. I gave it a 31 out of 40.
Nice. And yeah, I guess we can get into rewatchability here. I would give this one a thumbs up. Like we said, it's a fun episode. It touches on some very interesting themes. And then, yeah, obviously these characters do come back in a later episode of Static. So, yeah, I'd give this some thumbs up for rewatchability.
No, I would agree. I think, like you said, because the character comes up, I think because of the importance of the sort of the growth of the Static character, what that means. So I did have a question, though. Obviously, this is 2000. This debuted in 2003, and tossing aside show timelines for this period of time, it would seem to me, though, especially even though we haven't had an interaction between the two of them just yet, John Stewart has been an active Green Lantern for some time there. I guess Static just isn't aware that there's another black superhero in America.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that.
Or Steel, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess, well, Steel, obviously his entire face is covered, so maybe it's just not publicly known that that is a black man
Good point.
under all
Good
the
point.
armor.
Good point.
When it comes to Jon Stewart, that is a question, because actually later on in this season, Static teams up with the Justice League, including Jon Stewart. But I guess, yes, to this point in the series, obviously he hasn't met the Green Lantern yet. And to be fair, I guess it's sort of implied that John was off world for a lot of his Green Lantern career prior to Justice League. So, and obviously a lot of the Justice League adventures aren't always taking place on Earth. So maybe he just feels like Green Lantern's sort of this galactic hero, and it's not quite the same as having like a hometown hero in that case. That's my best guess. But yeah, that is sort of an interesting wrinkle to this, is where within the actual show order, just a few episodes away from Static teaming up with Jon Stewart and the rest of the Justice League. And yet, yeah, here he is sort of lamenting about them not really having a black superhero to look up to at home. So yeah, I guess Jon Stewart just hasn't reached that status, at least not in Static's world just yet.
There you go. Well, we know that he does, and there's actually a standalone. I think you just mentioned there's this outside of the Justice League crossover. There's actually a standalone Jon Stewart episode with Static. So things we have to look forward to when we return to the world of Static at some point. Not that we're necessarily going to cover those episodes the next time, but we'll definitely get to them eventually down the road, if not next time.
Absolutely. And we are beginning to wrap it up here, Cal. We were talking off the air about introducing sort of a new thing to do at the end of the month, and that is sort of just a month in review. What did we learn? What did we enjoy this month? What are the things that really stand out to you this month as we covered Static for the second time?
Well, things that I think it's widely known. I wasn't a fan of the music. That is still very, very difficult for me to kind of hold on to and grasp. I would say that this being only the second month that we've done of Static, I think it's learning that this show itself has its own voice, its own style, its own uniqueness about it. That while we've mentioned it feels at times more DCAU adjacent rather than DCAU proper. It creates its own world, it creates its own fun, and it has its own messages to deliver. And it's not necessarily to that more mature audience that Batman the Animated Series was directed towards, or even Justice League Unlimited towards the end, or Batman Beyond at times could be. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have things that are valuable. It doesn't have fun that we can have. It doesn't mean that there's not things that we can pull out of it and enjoy. So I'm really looking forward to the next time that we cover Static. It's bittersweet. We're kind of getting into a roll here on some Static, but I'm definitely looking forward to what we're jumping into next month. What about you? Do you have anything that came out of this month reviewing for Static?
Yeah, I think something I've noticed, and obviously we jump around a little bit. We started the month in season 3, went back to season 2, and then spent the last couple weeks here in season 3. And thank you to everyone who voted in our Twitter poll. That you all lovely people on Twitter actually helped us pick Static in Africa as our final review for this month, and we appreciate it because we had quite a bit of fun reviewing it. But I think something I've noticed sort of especially as you get into these later seasons of Static, is you actually do kind of see, even though each episode doesn't have a lot of continuity or callbacks to direct plot points, you do see the evolution of Static from where he is in the pilot as this kind of scared kid who's learning to deal with his powers and juggle high school and girls and all that stuff and his family life, and we see him sort of grow into his own man and his own superhero, especially by this third season. So I think that's something I've liked looking at, and certainly as we go back and forth between the different seasons, as we will the next time we review Static, I like checking in with Virgil at kind of different points in this journey. I think that's really fascinating. Yeah, so that will begin to wrap us up. As you mentioned, Cal, we are very excited about what we'll be reviewing next week. as we are returning to the world of Batman the Animated Series. I say the world, but it's all the same world because it's the DCAU.
That's right.
We're returning to the show, Batman the Animated Series, picking up where we left off. Unlike with Static and Superman and some of our other shows, we do review all of the Batman episodes in order. So we are picking up where we left off, oh boy, Cal, with the episode Tiger Tiger.
We're going from a man that's a leopard man to a man that is a tiger man. So we mentioned, we called Osebo Tiger Man several times, but deepest apologies. We did not mean to say that all cat men are exactly the same. But yes, next month we actually have a Tiger Man, but it's Tiger with a Y. As we jump into Tiger Tiger, which is sort of a pseudo sequel to Cat Scratch Fever, which if you've listened to our podcast, you'll know that is one of the lowest rated episodes to date that we've done. So this is going to be interesting, Liam, an interesting way to kick off the month of August.
Yes, it's going to be something of a Batman the Animated Series creature feature month, if you, as we get into some of the episodes we have on the docket, all throughout the month of August. But of course, next week that starts with Tiger Tiger. But that's all next week, and we will talk about that at length then. But until then, I'm Liam.
And I'm Cal.
And we'll be back next week with another episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.